Black woman was sold for being barren, until a lonely cowboy with 5 children chose her. "What am I bid for this barren woman?" the auctioneer shouted as the schoolteacher stood trembling on the wooden platform, her father's shame burning hotter than the desert sun. The crowd jeered and spat, calling her worthless, damaged goods fit only for the lowest bidder. She was destined for a life of servitude, her dignity stripped away like everything else she'd lost. But from the back of the crowd, a weathered rancher stepped forward, a giant cowboy with calloused hands and 5 motherless children waiting at home. What he saw in her, nobody else could understand. Yet beneath her broken exterior lay a secret that could transform his struggling family forever, or destroy the fragile hope they'd built together. Would her hidden truth become their salvation, or seal their doom? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The giant cowboy stepped through the jeering crowd, his boots heavy against the dusty ground. Mason Carter pulled worn bills from his pocket without hesitation. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a sharp crack. Willow Jacobs descended the platform on unsteady legs. Her dark skin glistened with sweat under the merciless Arizona sun. The townspeople dispersed, muttering about damaged goods and wasted money. Mason helped her onto his horse without a word. They rode in silence through the desert landscape, leaving behind the cruel laughter and whispered insults. Red rock formations stretched endlessly in every direction. The Carter Ranch appeared like a mirage. Weathered buildings stood strong against the harsh terrain. A windmill creaked in the distance. Horses grazed in fenced pastures that spoke of careful maintenance despite obvious hardship. 5 children emerged from the house like wary animals. Jed, 17 and broad-shouldered, crossed his arms over his chest. His eyes held suspicion and barely contained anger. Alma, 14 with sun-bleached hair, studied Willow with curious but guarded eyes. The twins Ben and Bate, 10 years old, whispered to each other behind cupped hands. Little Sam clung to his father's leg, peering at the stranger with wide eyes. Mason dismounted and helped Willow down. Her feet touched solid ground, but nothing felt stable. "Children, this is Miss Willow. She'll be helping around the house." Jed stepped forward, his jaw set firm. "We don't need help, Pa, we've been managing just fine." Mason's voice remained steady. "That's enough, son." The boy's eyes flashed with defiance, but he stepped back. The message was clear. Willow was an unwanted replacement for something precious they'd lost. Alma showed Willow to a small room behind the kitchen. The space held a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and nothing else. Willow sat on the thin mattress and stared at her hands. The first week brought constant reminders of her inadequacy. She burned the morning biscuits. The coffee tasted like mud. Her attempts at mending torn clothes created larger holes. The children watched her failures with satisfaction. Ben and Bate giggled when she spilled water carrying buckets from the well. Sam ran away whenever she approached. Even quiet Alma kept her distance. Jed made his feelings known without subtlety. He knocked over her carefully folded laundry. He brought muddy boots into the clean kitchen. He spoke around her as if she didn't exist. During supply runs to town, the cruel whispers followed. Women pulled their children closer when Willow passed. Men shook their heads at Mason's foolishness. The shopkeeper counted his money twice, as if her presence contaminated the bills. Mason never raised his voice, never showed impatience when she struggled with unfamiliar tasks. His steady presence became the only constant in her crumbling world. One evening, she found him organizing scattered papers on his desk. Letters, land deeds, and official documents created chaos across the wooden surface. Without thinking, she began sorting them by date and importance. Mason watched her work. "You can read." It wasn't a question. Willow's hand stilled over a territorial tax notice. "My grandmother taught me, before she died." She waited for mockery, but Mason only nodded. He handed her more papers to organize. They worked in comfortable silence until the pile became neat stacks. The next morning, she overheard Alma struggling with arithmetic. The girl sat at the kitchen table, erasing numbers over and over. Frustration brought tears to her eyes. Willow approached carefully. "May I?" Alma looked up, surprised. Willow took the pencil and showed her a different method. Numbers that seemed impossible suddenly made sense. The girl's face brightened with understanding. Word spread among the children. Willow could solve problems they couldn't. She knew things beyond cooking and cleaning. Their curiosity began to outweigh their resistance. Ben asked about the stars. Bate wanted to know why plants grew. Sam, still shy, listened from doorways as she answered their questions. Only Jed remained hostile. His antagonism grew stronger as his siblings warmed to her presence. 3 weeks after her arrival, dark clouds gathered over the desert. Lightning split the sky in brilliant forks. Thunder shook the house foundations. The storm hit with fury. Rain hammered against windows. Wind howled through gaps in the walls. The family huddled in the main room, listening to nature's violence. Sam began coughing during the storm's peak. Small coughs became harsh barks. His forehead burned with fever that climbed steadily higher. Mason paced like a caged animal. The nearest doctor lived 2 days' ride away. The storm made travel impossible. Alma held her little brother while he shivered despite the heat radiating from his skin. Ben and Bate cried quietly in the corner. Even Jed's hostility cracked, replaced by helpless fear. Sam's breathing grew labored. His small body fought against something none of them could see or battle. Mason knelt beside his youngest son, his weathered hands gentle on the boy's forehead. Desperation filled his eyes. The storm raged on, trapping them with their terror. Willow stood at the edge of the circle, watching the family face their worst nightmare. The fever climbed higher. Time was running out. Willow stepped forward into the circle of fear. Sam's breathing rattled in his chest like stones in a tin can. His fever burned so hot it seemed to glow through his pale skin. "I might be able to help." Mason looked up with desperate eyes. "How?" "My grandmother knew healing. She taught me before she died." She knelt beside the boy, pressing her palm against his forehead. The heat shocked her, but she'd felt this kind of fever before. Memory flooded back to her childhood, watching her grandmother work with steady hands and quiet confidence. "I need willow bark, white sage if you have it, clean cloths and boiling water." Mason stood immediately. "Alma, help me search the pantry. Jed, get water boiling." For the first time, the family moved as one unit with Willow at its center. They found dried willow bark in Mason's late wife's medical supplies. Sage grew wild behind the house despite the storm. Willow crushed the bark between 2 stones, releasing its bitter scent into the air. She worked methodically, remembering her grandmother's lessons. Steep the bark for fever, sage steam for breathing. Cool cloths to bring down the heat slowly, not too fast. The family watched her every movement. Her hands moved with certainty she didn't know she possessed. 20 years melted away. She was 8 years old again, standing beside her grandmother's bed, learning the difference between healing and helping. "My grandmother was born in slavery," she said quietly, measuring bark into hot water. But she remembered things from before, plants that healed, old knowledge passed down through generations. The willow tea steeped dark amber. She cooled it with careful drops of well water, testing the temperature against her wrist. Too hot would burn his throat. Too cool would lose its power. Sam's eyes fluttered open as she lifted his head. His lips were cracked and dry. She helped him sip the bitter medicine, one small swallow at a time. "Tastes awful," he whispered. "Good medicine usually does." She positioned him over a bowl of steaming sage water, creating a tent with blankets. The aromatic steam filled his lungs, loosening the tightness in his chest. Throughout the night, she maintained her vigil. Cool cloths on his forehead, medicine every 2 hours, steam treatments when his breathing grew labored. Mason sat beside her, watching his son fight the fever. "Where did you learn this?" "Grandmother raised me after my parents died. She was the only healer for miles around. White folks came to her when their doctors couldn't help. Alma joined them on the floor, helping to change wet cloths." "What happened to her?" "She died when I was 16. Left me her books and her knowledge." "You have books?" The girl's eyes widened with wonder. Willow nodded toward her small room. Hidden in my bag, medical texts, herbals, arithmetic primers. Mason stared at her with new understanding. You were a teacher. Until 3 months ago. She didn't elaborate. Some wounds were too fresh to expose. But sitting in this kitchen, fighting for a child's life, she remembered who she used to be. Before the lies destroyed her reputation. Before her father sold her like livestock. Sam's fever broke near dawn. His skin cooled under her touch. His breathing eased into natural sleep. The family collectively exhaled, releasing hours of held breath. Jed approached her for the first time without hostility. Thank you. Two simple words that changed everything. The next morning brought clear skies and new dynamics. Sam clung to Willow's skirts, calling her his angel. The twins peppered her with questions about plants and healing. Even Jed helped her gather herbs from the desert. But Alma's interest went deeper. She wanted to see the books. Willow retrieved her hidden bag from beneath her narrow bed. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay her treasures. A medical text from 1878, McGuffey's Arithmetic, a grammar primer with worn pages. Alma touched the books like sacred objects. Will you teach me? If your father approves. Mason appeared in the doorway. He'd been listening. I'd be honored if you taught all of them. That afternoon, Willow cleared space at the kitchen table. 5 children gathered around, ranging in age and ability but united in curiosity. She started with simple lessons, gauging their knowledge. Ben struggled with basic addition. Bate could read simple words but stumbled over longer ones. Alma showed promise in mathematics but lacked proper instruction. Sam knew his letters but couldn't form them properly. Jed, oldest of all, had never learned to read beyond his own name. We'll start slow, Willow promised. Learning is like growing plants. It takes time and patience. Word of the children's improvement spread to neighboring ranches. Parents noticed the Carter children speaking more clearly, helping with calculations, reading aloud from newspapers. Within 2 weeks, the first neighbor arrived with a shy request. Could Miss Willow teach their daughter too? Then came another family, and another. Soon, 8 children crowded around the kitchen table. Willow transformed part of the main room into a proper classroom. She created lessons that mixed practical frontier skills with academic subjects. The children learned arithmetic through measuring feed and calculating distances. They studied geography by mapping local landmarks. Reading came through newspapers and letters, connecting them to the wider world. Mason watched the transformation with growing amazement. His house had become the territory's first real school. His children, once isolated and limited, now possessed tools to build any future they chose. Most remarkably, Willow herself transformed. The broken woman from the auction block disappeared, replaced by someone confident and purposeful. She'd found her calling again. But outside their growing sanctuary, storm clouds of a different kind were gathering. Men in expensive suits had been asking questions in town. Questions about land values and railway routes. Questions about the Carter Ranch. Willow's classroom expanded beyond the kitchen table within a month. 12 children now gathered each morning, their ages ranging from 6 to 15. She organized them by ability rather than age, pairing advanced students with beginners. The transformation was remarkable. Children who'd never held books now read aloud with confidence. Mathematical concepts that once seemed impossible became tools for daily life. The ranch buzzed with intellectual energy. Mason built proper desks from salvaged wood. He installed additional windows for better light. The main room became a genuine schoolhouse, complete with a blackboard made from painted lumber. Parents traveled significant distances to bring their children. The Hendersons rode 2 hours each way. The Murphy family camped nearby during the week. Word spread across the territory about the exceptional teacher at Carter Ranch. Willow developed teaching methods that connected learning to frontier life. Students calculated grain supplies while studying arithmetic. They wrote letters to distant relatives for penmanship practice. Geography lessons included mapping trade routes and water sources. The children thrived under her patient instruction. Even the most reluctant learners found success through her innovative approaches. She never raised her voice or showed frustration when progress came slowly. Mason observed these changes with growing admiration. His own children had become confident, articulate, and curious about the world beyond their ranch. Jed discussed politics from newspaper articles. Alma solved complex mathematical problems. The younger ones asked thoughtful questions about everything they encountered. More importantly, Willow herself continued to transform. The fearful woman from the auction block had vanished completely. In her place stood a confident educator who commanded respect through competence and kindness. Their partnership evolved naturally. Mason handled ranch operations while Willow managed the school. They worked together in the evenings, planning lessons and discussing each child's progress. Their conversations grew longer and more personal as trust deepened. Late one evening, as they organized lesson materials, Mason spoke quietly. "You saved more than Sam's life that night." "What do you mean?" "You saved all of us. Gave us purpose we didn't know we were missing." Willow felt warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since her world collapsed, she belonged somewhere. These children needed her knowledge. This family valued her contributions. The Carter children had begun calling her Ma Willow without prompting. The title felt natural, earned through months of dedication rather than demanded through authority. Her garden flourished alongside the school. She taught botany through hands-on cultivation. Students learned about plant biology by tending vegetables and herbs. The garden provided both food and living laboratory for their studies. Spring brought territorial officials to observe the school. They arrived expecting a makeshift operation but found a legitimate educational institution. Student progress impressed even skeptical inspectors. "Miss Jacobs, your methods are quite advanced," the lead inspector noted. "We'd like to include your school in our official territorial registry." Recognition meant funding and supplies. More importantly, it meant legitimacy. Willow's school would be acknowledged as a proper institution, not just informal tutoring. The certificate arrived 3 weeks later, signed by the territorial governor himself. Carter Ranch School was now officially recognized. Parents could be certain their children received education equivalent to established town schools. Enrollment requests poured in from across the territory. Families offered substantial payments for their children's education. Some proposed boarding arrangements to accommodate greater distances. Mason and Willow discussed expansion possibilities during their evening planning sessions. They could build additional classroom space, hire assistant teachers for specialized subjects, create dormitory facilities for distant students. Their conversations revealed shared dreams and compatible values. Both believed education could transform lives and communities. Both valued hard work, integrity, and treating all people with dignity. Romance developed gradually through these working partnerships. Mutual respect evolved into deep affection. They found comfort in each other's company and strength in their shared purpose. One evening, as they walked through her thriving garden, Mason took her hand. No words were necessary. Their bond had grown from practical necessity into genuine love. But their peaceful progress faced emerging threats. Well-dressed strangers appeared in town, asking questions about local ranchers. They inquired about land ownership, water rights, and property values. These men carried official-looking documents and spoke of progress and development. They mentioned railway expansion and the prosperity it would bring to the territory. The Henderson family received the first visit. Polite men in expensive suits offered substantial sums for their ranch. When politely declined, they promised to return with better offers. Similar visits followed across the region. Some families accepted generous payments and relocated. Others, like Mason, refused to sell regardless of offered amounts. The pressure campaign began subtly. Fences suffered mysterious damage overnight. Livestock wandered through gaps that hadn't existed the day before. Water sources became contaminated with unknown substances. Mason discovered cut fence lines on a Tuesday morning. Fresh tool marks showed deliberate sabotage rather than natural wear. The message was clear but unspoken. 3 days later, their best breeding mare disappeared. Tracking showed she'd been led away rather than wandering off. No ransom demands came, just the pointed absence of valuable property. Other families reported similar incidents. Those who'd refused to sell experienced accidents and mishaps. Those who'd accepted offers departed quickly and quietly. Fear crept into the community. Parents worried about sending children to school across increasingly dangerous territory. Some families considered accepting the railway company's offers simply to escape the harassment. During a particularly tense community meeting, Willow made an unexpected discovery. She'd been organizing the school's official papers when she noticed inconsistencies in the railway company's documentation. The letterhead didn't match official territorial records. The legal language contained errors that legitimate documents wouldn't include. Most suspiciously, the proposed railway route seemed to bypass major towns while targeting remote ranches. Something wasn't right about these supposedly official railway representatives. Their documents looked authentic, but felt wrong to someone trained to recognize proper legal formatting. Willow kept her suspicions private while gathering more evidence. If these men weren't legitimate railway agents, then who were they, and what did they really want with the Carter Ranch? Willow worked by candlelight long after the family slept. The railway documents spread across the kitchen table told a story that didn't add up. Official seals looked authentic, but the paper quality was wrong. Legal terminology contained subtle errors that legitimate government papers never made. She compared the suspicious documents with Mason's genuine land deeds and territorial correspondence. The differences became obvious once she knew what to look for. Font styles didn't match. Reference numbers followed incorrect patterns. Even the official signatures seemed too perfect, as if traced rather than naturally written. Her teaching experience had trained her to spot forgeries. Students sometimes attempted to alter grades or create fake excuse letters. She developed a keen eye for inconsistencies and deceptions. But these weren't schoolyard pranks. These documents were being used to intimidate families into abandoning their homes. The scope of the deception suggested something far more serious than railway expansion. The next morning brought disturbing news. The Murphy family had packed their belongings overnight and departed without explanation. Their ranch sat empty, with no forwarding information left behind. Other neighbors reported similar sudden departures. Fear was spreading through the community like wildfire. Parents pulled children from school rather than risk traveling dangerous roads. Families that had lived in the territory for generations suddenly found reasons to visit distant relatives. Willow decided to investigate further. She needed evidence of the fraud before approaching authorities. Her reputation as a former teacher would mean nothing without solid proof of criminal activity. She began corresponding with territorial officials, requesting copies of legitimate railway expansion documents. The replies revealed shocking information. No railway company had received authorization to purchase land in their region. No expansion plans existed for their territory. The men claiming to represent railway interests were complete fraudsters. Armed with this knowledge, Willow started reaching out to families beyond their immediate area. She wrote careful letters to other teachers and community leaders, asking about similar incidents in their regions. The responses painted a disturbing pattern. Identical schemes had appeared across multiple territories. Well-dressed men with official documents pressuring ranchers to sell. Families experiencing accidents and harassment when they refused. Entire communities abandoned in the span of months. But the most chilling discovery came in a letter from a teacher in Colorado Territory. She described meeting a former colleague who'd been destroyed by false accusations and forced to flee her position. The woman's name was familiar, though they'd never met. Her story matched Willow's experience exactly. The same tactics, the same systematic destruction of reputation, the same corrupt official behind the persecution. Judge Morrison. The name hit Willow like a physical blow. Morrison had orchestrated her downfall in New Mexico. He'd spread lies about her character and forced her father to sell her at auction. Now he was using similar methods on an even larger scale. This wasn't random criminal activity. It was personal. Willow's hands shook as she read through the correspondence again. Morrison had been traveling between territories, identifying valuable land and orchestrating schemes to acquire it cheaply. He used his judicial position to legitimize fraud and intimidate opposition. Her persecution hadn't been isolated cruelty. It had been practiced for something much bigger. She shared her discoveries with Mason that evening. His face darkened as she explained the connections and patterns she'd uncovered. He followed you here. Not followed. He was already planning this. I just happened to be in his way again. Mason studied the forged documents with new understanding. So there's no railway company. There's probably a legitimate company involved somewhere, but Morrison is using fraudulent documents to acquire land at a fraction of its value. When the real railway comes through, he'll sell for enormous profits. The scope of Morrison's scheme became clear. He wasn't just stealing individual ranches. He was stealing the future prosperity of entire regions. But knowing the truth and proving it were different challenges. Morrison held judicial authority and political connections. His word would carry more weight than a former slave woman with a suspicious past. Willow needed irrefutable evidence and influential allies. She began building a network of correspondence with affected communities. Teachers, ministers, and local leaders provided information about Morrison's activities across multiple territories. Each letter added another piece to a growing puzzle of corruption and fraud. The evidence mounted steadily. Identical forged documents appeared in different territories. The same harassment tactics targeted resistant families. Multiple witnesses described the same well-dressed men making identical threats. More importantly, she discovered Morrison's financial connections. Bank records showed large land purchases followed by quick resales. The profits were staggering, representing the life savings of dozens of displaced families. But the investigation attracted dangerous attention. Someone was watching the ranch more closely now. Fresh horseshoe tracks appeared around the property perimeter. Strange men lingered in town, asking questions about the school and its teacher. The pressure campaign against the Carter family intensified. Their prize bull was found dead in the pasture, apparently poisoned. The main well became contaminated overnight, forcing them to haul water from a distant spring. Most ominously, threatening messages began appearing. Notes left on fence posts warned about the dangers of interfering in official business. The implications were clear without being explicitly stated. Willow realized her investigation had been discovered. Morrison knew she was building a case against him. The harassment would escalate until she either fled or was silenced permanently. But she also realized something else. Her network of correspondence had created exactly what she needed most: witnesses, documentation, evidence from multiple sources that corroborated her accusations. She had enough proof to bring down Morrison's entire operation. The question was whether she could survive long enough to present it to the right authorities. The answer came sooner than expected. Federal marshals were reportedly traveling through the territory, investigating claims of judicial corruption. If she could reach them with her evidence, Morrison's reign of terror would end. If she failed, her family and school would be destroyed just like her previous life. The federal marshals arrived on a dusty Thursday morning, their badges glinting in the desert sun. Willow watched from the schoolhouse window as they dismounted in the town square, their presence sending ripples of nervous energy through the community. She had prepared for this moment. Every piece of evidence was organized and documented. Letters from affected families across 3 territories filled a leather portfolio. Forged documents were arranged beside legitimate territorial papers, highlighting the discrepancies she discovered. But Morrison moved faster than expected. That same afternoon, his men surrounded the schoolhouse during lessons. 6 well-dressed individuals with cold eyes and official-looking papers blocked every exit. The children huddled close to Willow's desk, sensing the danger even if they couldn't understand it. "Miss Jacobs, you're interfering with official business," the lead man announced. "This school operates without proper authorization." Willow stood calmly, her hand resting on the territorial certificate that legitimized her institution. "Our authorization comes directly from the territorial government. That authorization has been revoked due to complaints about your moral character." The familiar accusation hit like a physical blow. Morrison was using the same tactics that had destroyed her previous life. False moral charges designed to discredit her before she could present evidence of his corruption. Mason appeared in the doorway, alerted by the commotion. Behind him stood several other parents who'd come to collect their children. Their faces showed confusion and growing anger. "What's the meaning of this?" Mason demanded. "Legal proceedings, sir. This woman has been operating a school under false pretenses." Jed stepped forward, his 17-year-old frame rigid with protective fury. "Ma Willow is the best teacher this territory has ever seen." Other children voiced similar defenses. Even shy Sam spoke up, declaring that Willow had saved his life and taught him to read. The unanimous support surprised Morrison's men, who'd expected to find a community ready to abandon their disgraced teacher. But the lead investigator pressed forward with practiced authority. "We have testimony regarding her unsuitability to educate children, moral deficiencies that make her presence here inappropriate." Alma stood beside her desk, holding up a perfectly solved mathematical equation. "She taught me this. She taught all of us to think and learn and grow." One by one, the children presented evidence of their education. Ben recited poetry he'd memorized. Bate demonstrated her improved handwriting. Sam read aloud from a territorial newspaper with perfect pronunciation. The parents watched this display with growing understanding. Whatever accusations these men brought, the proof of Willow's competence surrounded them in the form of educated, confident children. "Your concerns are noted," Mason said firmly, "but our school will continue operating under territorial authority." The men exchanged glances. Their intimidation tactics were failing against united community resistance. "Perhaps we should discuss this matter privately," the lead investigator suggested, his tone carrying implicit threats. Willow recognized the escalation. Morrison's men were preparing to use more direct methods if legal intimidation failed. The children needed to be protected from whatever came next. She began dismissing students with careful calm. Parents collected their children quickly, sensing the adults needed to handle something dangerous without young witnesses present. As the schoolhouse emptied, Willow made her decision. She retrieved her portfolio of evidence and faced Morrison's men directly. "I know who sent you. Judge Morrison's scheme ends today." The lead investigator's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Railroad fraud across 3 territories, forged documents, intimidation campaigns against legitimate landowners. Federal marshals are already investigating corruption in territorial courts. She opened her portfolio and displayed the organized evidence. Bank records showing Morrison's suspicious land transactions. Letters from displaced families describing identical harassment tactics. Copies of forged documents alongside legitimate territorial papers. This is all documented and verified. The marshals will be very interested in Morrison's activities. The men stared at the comprehensive case she'd built. Months of careful investigation had created an irrefutable pattern of corruption and fraud. "You have no authority to make such accusations," one of them said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "I have evidence and witnesses. More importantly, I have federal attention focused on judicial corruption in this territory." Mason stepped beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Miss Willow has the full support of this community. Our school operates legally and serves families across the region. Other parents filed back into the schoolhouse, forming a protective circle around their teacher. The Henderson family, the Murphys, the Williams clan, families who'd seen their children flourish under Willow's instruction. "We stand with our teacher," Mrs. Henderson declared. "Whatever accusations you're making, we've seen her character firsthand." The community support created an unexpected problem for Morrison's men. They'd expected to find an isolated woman they could intimidate or discredit easily. Instead, they faced unified resistance from an entire region. The lead investigator made one final attempt. "Federal marshals will investigate all claims thoroughly. False accusations carry serious consequences." Willow smiled with quiet confidence. "I welcome federal investigation. My evidence will speak for itself." The men retreated, but their departure felt temporary. Morrison wouldn't abandon his scheme easily, especially with federal attention threatening his entire operation. That evening, as Willow organized her evidence for presentation to the marshals, she reflected on the day's events. 3 months ago, she'd been sold like livestock, considered worthless and discarded. Today, an entire community had stood beside her against powerful corruption. Her transformation was complete, but the real test was yet to come. Morrison would make one final desperate move to destroy her before the federal marshals could act on her evidence. She was ready for him. The federal marshals arrived at dawn, their badges reflecting the first rays of desert sunlight. Marshal Thompson, a weathered man with intelligent eyes, examined Willow's evidence with methodical precision. Each document received careful scrutiny. Every letter was read completely. "This is comprehensive work, Miss Jacobs. You've built a solid case." Willow had organized everything chronologically, showing Morrison's pattern of corruption across multiple territories. Bank records proved the financial motive. Witness testimonies established the systematic harassment. Forged documents demonstrated the fraudulent methods. "How many families have been affected?" Marshal Thompson asked. "At least 40 that I've documented. Probably twice that number across all territories." The scope of Morrison's scheme impressed even experienced federal investigators. Entire communities had been systematically destroyed for personal profit. But before the marshals could act, Morrison made his desperate final move. Judge Morrison arrived that afternoon with his own contingent of men, claiming federal authority he didn't possess. He carried official-looking warrants and spoke with the confidence of established power. "Miss Jacobs is under arrest for interfering with territorial judicial proceedings," he announced to the gathered crowd. The townspeople who'd once mocked her now formed a protective barrier around the schoolhouse. Parents whose children she'd educated stood firm against Morrison's intimidation. "On what charges?" Marshal Thompson demanded, producing his legitimate federal credentials. Morrison's composure wavered as he realized federal marshals were already investigating his activities. His fraudulent authority meant nothing against genuine federal jurisdiction. Corruption of territorial education systems, false documentation, interference with legitimate business proceedings. "Those are interesting charges coming from you, Judge Morrison." Willow stepped forward, her portfolio of evidence in hand. 3 months of careful investigation had prepared her for this confrontation. "Marshal Thompson, this man orchestrated my destruction in New Mexico territory using identical false accusations. He's been traveling between territories, using judicial corruption to steal land through fraudulent railway schemes." She presented her evidence methodically. Morrison's financial records showing suspicious land transactions. Testimonies from displaced families across 3 territories. Copies of forged railway documents compared with legitimate territorial papers. Every family that refused to sell experienced harassment and intimidation. Those who accepted his fraudulent offers lost their homes for a fraction of their value. He then resold the land to legitimate railway companies for enormous profits. Marshall Thompson studied the documentation with growing interest. The pattern was undeniable, the evidence overwhelming. Morrison attempted to maintain his authority. These are wild accusations from a woman of questionable moral character. The same accusations you made in New Mexico before forcing her sale at public auction. Alma Carter interjected, her 14-year-old voice cutting through Morrison's bluster. The girl had been listening to adult conversations and understood more than anyone realized. Her words carried the weight of witnessed truth. Ma Willow saved my brother's life and taught us all to read and write and think, Sam added, his 7-year-old honesty devastating Morrison's credibility. One by one, the Carter children testified to Willow's character and competence. Their education and articulation proved her worth more effectively than any formal defense. The community joined their testimony. Parents described the transformation in their children's abilities and attitudes. Neighbors spoke of Willow's quiet dignity and consistent kindness. Morrison found himself facing the united opposition of an entire region. His intimidation tactics had backfired completely, creating solidarity instead of fear. Marshall Thompson made his decision. Judge Morrison, you're under federal arrest for corruption, fraud, and conspiracy. Your authority in this territory is suspended pending investigation. The arrest proceeded swiftly. Morrison's men scattered as their leader was placed in federal custody. His scheme collapsed like a house built on sand, its foundation of corruption finally exposed. But the victory extended beyond justice for one corrupt official. The community had discovered its own strength through unified resistance to intimidation and fraud. The federal investigation proceeded over several weeks. Willow's evidence proved crucial in documenting the scope of Morrison's crimes. Her teaching experience had prepared her to organize complex information effectively. Displaced families received compensation from Morrison's seized assets. Legitimate railway companies negotiated fairly with remaining landowners. The territory's development proceeded honestly for the first time in years. Most importantly, Carter Ranch School received official federal recognition as a model educational institution. Willow's innovative teaching methods attracted attention from territorial education officials across the region. 6 months later, the school had expanded to accommodate 30 students. Additional teachers arrived to help manage the growing enrollment. What had begun as informal tutoring had become the territory's premier educational facility. Willow and Mason married that spring in a ceremony attended by the entire community. Parents whose children she'd taught provided flowers from their gardens. Students performed musical pieces they'd learned in her classes. The woman who'd been sold as worthless property had become the cornerstone of regional educational development. Years passed with steady growth and prosperity. Carter Ranch School produced graduates who became teachers, merchants, territorial officials, and community leaders. Willow's influence spread through every family she'd touched. A sign erected at the ranch entrance declared Carter Family School, all children welcome. The message embodied everything Willow had fought to achieve: education without prejudice, opportunity based on merit, and community built on mutual respect. 10 years after the auction block, Willow stood before her largest graduating class. 23 students prepared to enter the wider world with skills and confidence that would have been impossible without her dedication. Among the graduates stood Jed Carter, now a qualified teacher himself. Alma had become her assistant and closest colleague. Sam, the boy whose fever had first revealed her healing knowledge, planned to study medicine in the territorial capital. The ranch thrived under Mason's management, while the school flourished under Willow's leadership. Their partnership had created something neither could have achieved alone: a lasting legacy of education, opportunity, and hope. As she watched her students receive their certificates, Willow reflected on the journey from despair to triumph. She'd been purchased as broken property and transformed herself into an invaluable community asset. Her greatest victory wasn't personal vindication, but the knowledge that hundreds of children would carry forward the education she'd provided. Their success would be her immortality.